Over 3,000 years ago, ancient Egypt, one of the most powerful empires of all time. During its 18th dynasty, a young boy just 9 years old ascended the throne. His name was Tutankhamun. King Tut might have remained a minor footnote in history, but for an amazing discovery in the 1920s. British archaeologist Howard Carter made a remarkable find. A stunning tomb of gold and artifacts, the trappings of a pharaoh whose people saw him as a living god. Tut's predecessor, the pharaoh Akhenaten, who may have been his father, created turmoil by replacing Egypt's many gods with only one, the Aten, or sun disk. Tutankhamun's plans to restore the traditional beliefs were cut short when he died unexpectedly at just 19 years of age. How he died is still a mystery. Now, come face to face with the Boy King, the story of Tutankhamun, the Golden King, and the great pharaohs. I'm Bill Curtis. More than 5,000 years ago, an agricultural community was developing in northern Africa, along the banks of the Nile. From modest beginnings, this new state, Egypt, evolved into one of the most powerful empires of all times, ruled by pharaohs whose names are still known to us today. Yet one stands out, Tutankhamun, whose royal burial is said to be the greatest archaeological discovery of all time. Egypt has been called the gift of the Nile because the yearly flooding left a rich silt along the banks that provided the country with fertile soil that produced a wide variety of crops. The country developed a vibrant belief system with many different gods, and temples were built as their divine residence. Priests took care of the gods on a daily basis, and the kings officiated during ceremonies. Some temples were for state occasions, such as Luxor and Karnak, but others were part of the funerary complexes the kings built to ensure their immortality. Dr. Zahi Hawass is Egypt's General Secretary of the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities and a world-renowned archaeologist.
The thinking of afterlife built ancient Egypt, built Egypt, in my opinion. Without that, you will never see the pyramids. It is the belief on the afterlife who made everyone in ancient Egypt to work for the national project. The national project was building a pyramid or building a tomb.
It seems that the ancient Egyptians spent a good deal of their time building for eternity. But why? Early in their history, more than 5,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians already had a concept of life after death.
The Egyptians essentially believed that death was a continuation of life, only better. And so as a result, they stocked their tombs with everything they could possibly need: food, clothing, jewelry, furniture, as well as magical symbols and figures.
As time went on and burial procedures became more elaborate, the process of mummification became more involved. Certain types of drying processes were used. Different styles and types of wrappings covered the body, and a variety of jewelry and amulets accompanied the body in the coffin into the afterlife. At some point prior to the Old Kingdom, embalmers began to remove different parts of the body, fearing that their decay might interfere with the preservation of the body. Some organs, like the brain, were discarded. The heart was mummified separately, but it was returned to the body. The lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines were embalmed, and by the 4th dynasty, burials began to include a separate chest for these organs. Most people connect Egypt with the pyramids. They were royal tombs, but represent only one stage in a long series of monuments created for the afterlife of a pharaoh. Early kings had smaller tombs with flat roofs, But soon a stepped form evolved, with many layers, like a ladder for the king to ascend to heaven and reside with the gods forever. Pharaoh Djoser's step pyramid was the first monumental building in history constructed entirely of stone. A generation or two later, the true pyramid evolved. 4 smooth sides, rising to more than 400 feet, heights never reached before.
It's probably the precision, the way that these were made, that astounds us today, because a modern house doesn't even have the kind of precision that you can find in this pyramid. Each of the sides are pretty much exactly the same length, within less than an inch of each other.
These wonders of the 4th dynasty, their precision, their monumentality, and their size would never again be duplicated. Securing the pyramid's treasures was a major task, and elaborate traps would be designed to capture any trespassers. No matter what security measures were set in place, all the pyramids would share a common fate.
All of the tombs were robbed. And you know, even the pharaohs realized that. They put in blocking stones, they tried everything. By the 18th dynasty, it was clear the pyramids were a giant neon sign to say, "This way to the gold."
In the beginning of the 18th dynasty, the Egyptians changed tactics. They moved the royal cemetery to the south, at Thebes. No giant monuments pointed the way to the pharaoh's treasure. These tombs now were hidden, deep within the craggy walls of a bleak area. Well beyond the cultivated fields near the Nile, nothing grew there. It was literally the land of the dead. This isolated location did, however, provide a very significant natural landmark.
You know, the ancient Egyptians, when they came to this valley, they wanted really to hide their tombs. They want to look at a place of silence, a place of mystery, a place that can keep the tombs of the kings of the new kingdom who ruled Egypt in the time of the Golden Age. They built pyramids in the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, but pyramids never saved their mummies. And that's why when they came to the valley, they looked at the top and they saw that peak, which is a shape of a pyramid. And they built all the tombs under this shape.
The Valley of the Kings would provide the final resting place for many kings and queens of Egypt's new kingdom. Tombs were prepared, carved sometimes hundreds of feet into the bedrock, meandering down until the final focus, the burial chamber. Yet, despite the secrecy of their construction, official protection of the site, and the magical images and spells that adorned the walls, even these tombs were subject to robbery. All, that is, except the tomb of the boy king, Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun was born in the palace King Akhenaten built in the new capital city, Amarna, a site sacred to no other god. The pharaoh Akhenaten moved there during the 18th dynasty, when he broke with tradition and began his religious revolution, which introduced the belief in a single god, the Aten.
It wasn't something the Egyptians really liked, apparently, because when Akhenaten died and when Tutankhamun died and then eventually the last successor died, then everything was hacked out, all of the images, every name, everything. And so while monotheism may have actually taken root someplace else, in Egypt, it was finished.
Akhenaten's religion is very, very unsatisfactory for the ancient Egyptian populace because he does not address the question of death and the afterlife. He ignores it utterly. And so when you die, you sleep and you cease to exist. This is not what the ancient Egyptians want to hear. They've been dealing with a religion that is all about encapsulating their soul in materiality. It's about their existence in the future. And if you just ignore one of the chief problems of humanity, which is death, that we're all going to die, your religion will not last.
The biggest mistake, in my opinion, that Akhenaten did, that he made the Egyptian to worship the new god through him, is only Aten, the power behind the sun, is giving the hand to him, and he's giving it to the people. Then when he died, the Egyptian could not find the connection between them and the God.
In all likelihood, the young prince Tutankhamun, as he was called then, was born in one of the palaces. It's not known for sure who Tut's father was. DNA samples may provide the answers.
Who really the father of Tutankhamun? Is he Akhenaten or Amenhotep III? We do have, for the first time, DNA, and we hope we'll be able to reveal for the first time the members of the family of the golden boy, Tutankhamun.
Kia, a secondary wife of Akhenaten, perhaps his mother, died in childbirth. As documented on the walls of her tomb at Saqqara, Maya, a wet nurse, would raise him. Since Egyptians rarely depicted princes, we really know little of his early years. Tutankhamun eventually succeeded Akhenaten at about 9 years old, inheriting an empire in disarray. Soon Tutankhamun embraced the gods of his forefathers, even having himself depicted in their image. He then changed his name to Tutankhamun to honor the former national god of Egypt, Amun. The boy king would never reach his goals of completely restoring the traditional beliefs, for he died unexpectedly at about 19 years of age. Why did he die? Was it a sudden illness, an accident, or was it murder?
It's hard to know exactly what caused Tutankhamun's death, but recent CAT scans that were done by the National Geographic Society have proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that the damage to the back of his skull was not because of an attempted murder, and it seems to have been a post-mortem event. So did he die from another cause? It's hard to say. There is a possibility that there was a wound on his leg which did not heal correctly, and he may have died of blood poisoning.
When I moved the mummy and I put it under the CAT scan machine, I found out he died at the age of 19, and I found out that this hole in the back of the head was opened in Dynasty 18 for the Egyptian to put the liquid for mummification. And we found out that there is a fracture in his left leg, and he had an accident 1 day before he died. What kind of an accident? We don't know.
Tutankhamun was probably too young for his tomb to have been completed, so preparers had to make alternative plans for his burial during the 70-day period they had while mummification was taking place. One of the first steps in preparing Tutankhamun's body for burial would have been removing his inner organs and preserving the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines. Each had its own container. This solid gold coffinet is inlaid with carnelian and colored glass. It portrays the king as Osiris, with his arms crossed over his chest and holding the royal insignia of the crook and flail. Each organ was guarded by a different god. All four were the sons of Horus. This coffinet held the pharaoh's stomach. A small tomb, never meant to be a royal burial, was finally readied for the king, with one of the 4 small chambers decorated as a burial chamber. This chamber would be stocked with treasures beyond belief, and it remained hidden until early in the 20th century. When we come back, more from our story, and a preview of some of the many treasures that will be on display in a brand new exhibition that will make its North American debut at the Atlanta Civic Center this fall. British-born Howard Carter moved to Egypt in his late teens. He had incredible artistic talent and was able to use that skill, working as an illustrator for archaeologists. He served with some of the best field archaeologists and used his time wisely, learning valuable lessons from the masters. He would eventually become an archaeologist himself. Always in the back of his mind was his desire to work in the Valley of the Kings. The Earl of Carnarvon also had a great interest in Egypt and had visited the country in part for the health benefits it offered his frail constitution. Like Carter, Carnarvon was also fascinated by Egyptian archaeology, and this common interest would bind the two men.
There had actually been indications that perhaps the tomb of Tutankhamun was still to be found. An embalming cache, that is, fragments left over from making the mummy and the funeral feast, had been discovered by an earlier excavator, Theodore Davis, who mistakenly thought that was all that was left of Tutankhamun's tomb. But in fact, it indicated that there was a tomb possibly still nearby.